In December 1944, as bitter winter descended upon the Ardennes forest in Belgium, American forces faced not only the largest German offensive of the Western Front, but also a desperate medical crisis that threatened the lives of hundreds of wounded soldiers. The Battle of the Bulge, as it would later be known, created a perfect storm of medical challenges, overwhelming casualties, brutally cold conditions, and critically depleted medical supplies. Archival footage from the period shows snow-covered field hospitals overwhelmed with wounded men, medical personnel working by lantern light as temperatures plummeted well below freezing. The German offensive had begun on December 16th with a massive artillery barrage, followed by a swift armored advance that caught Allied forces by surprise. Within days, American casualty rates soared to levels not seen since the Normandy invasion. The 107th Evacuation Hospital, stationed near Bastogne, found itself directly in the path of the German advance. As enemy forces pushed through Allied lines, the hospital staff faced an impossible situation. Evacuation routes were cut off, supply lines severed, and the wounded continued to pour in. Among the most critical shortages was intravenous solution, essential for treating shock, blood loss, and dehydration. Without it, severely wounded soldiers had little chance of survival. Military medical records from December 1944 reveal the desperate situation. One physician's report stated, "Critical shortage of IV fluids, plasma supplies exhausted, unable to properly treat shock cases, urgent resupply needed." But with German forces controlling the surrounding roads and adverse weather preventing airdrops, resupply seemed impossible. Dr. James Harrison, the chief surgeon at the 107th, gathered his medical staff on December 19th to address the crisis. "We've got over 100 men who need IV fluids to survive the night," he told them grimly. "Our last bags were used an hour ago. We need solutions, not excuses." The assembled doctors and nurses fell silent, the impossibility of their situation hanging heavy in the air. It was in this moment that Lieutenant Margaret Peggy Collins, a 32-year-old Army nurse from Minneapolis, spoke up. Collins wasn't like many of the other nurses. Before joining the Army Nurse Corps in 1942, she had earned a degree in chemistry and worked in a pharmaceutical laboratory. This unique background gave her insights that would prove invaluable in the crisis they now faced. A surviving photograph shows Collins in her standard issue uniform, a capable-looking woman with determined eyes and an expression of quiet confidence. Former colleagues described her as methodical and innovative, someone who approached problems from unexpected angles. "Peggy wasn't just a great nurse," recalled Dr. William Stevens, who worked alongside her. "She understood the science behind what we were doing. When supplies ran low, she was always the one finding creative solutions." Since arriving in Europe shortly after D-Day, Collins had served in field hospitals from Normandy through France and into Belgium. She had developed a reputation for improvising under difficult conditions, once using helmet liners as basins when proper equipment ran short, and crafting splints from ammunition crates when standard supplies were depleted. But the challenge they now faced was of an entirely different magnitude. "I might have a solution for the IV fluid shortage," Collins said to Dr. Harrison and the assembled staff. "It won't be conventional, but it could work." The medical team looked at her with a mixture of doubt and desperate hope. Collins explained that intravenous solution was essentially sterile water with precise concentrations of salt and sometimes glucose, substances that were still available, even if the prepared solutions were gone. "We have the ingredients," she said. "What we lack is a way to prepare and sterilize the solution safely." In normal circumstances, IV fluids were prepared in controlled laboratory conditions, using specialized equipment to ensure sterility and precise electrolyte balance. Any contamination could be fatal to patients already fighting for their lives. Creating safe IV solutions in a battlefield hospital with limited resources seemed impossible. But Collins had been observing the equipment used by the combat troops. "The men's canteens," she continued. "They're made of aluminum. They can withstand high heat for sterilization, they're relatively clean, and importantly, they're plentiful." She proposed using the canteens as vessels to mix, sterilize, and store improvised IV solutions. The doctors looked skeptical. Colonel Richard Bennett, the hospital's commanding officer, frowned. "Nurse Collins, we're talking about introducing fluids directly into patients' bloodstreams. The risk of contamination is significant," Collins acknowledged. "But I believe we can establish a rigorous enough sterilization protocol to make it work. The alternative is watching men die of shock when we might have saved them." She outlined her proposed method: careful measurement of components, thorough cleaning of the canteens, sterilization using the hospital's autoclave, and a filtering system cobbled together from available medical supplies. Dr. Harrison stroked his chin thoughtfully. After 20 years of medical practice, including 3 wars, he had learned to recognize innovation born of necessity. "It's unorthodox," he admitted, "but these are unorthodox times." He turned to Collins. "How quickly can you set up a test batch?" "Give me 2 hours," she replied. As Collins left to begin her work, Dr. Harrison turned to his medical staff. "Let me be clear," he said soberly. "If this doesn't work, we lose those men anyway. I'm authorizing this attempt." The experimental treatment protocol was officially designated alternative fluid therapy in the medical logs, but among the staff, it quickly became known as Collins Canteen 4 Hack. What followed was a remarkable feat of improvisation, drawing on Collins' unique combination of nursing experience and chemistry knowledge. The first challenge was establishing a clean workspace in the chaotic field hospital. Collins commandeered a corner of the medical supply tent, setting up a makeshift laboratory on a folding table. Working methodically amid the sounds of artillery fire in the distance, she began the process of creating life-saving fluids from basic components. Military supply records show that Collins requisitioned salt packets from ration kits, distilled water reserved for medical instruments, glucose from the hospital's dwindling supplies, and 24 canteens collected from soldiers and medical personnel. Using a small postal scale, she measured precise amounts of salt and glucose to match the concentrations found in standard IV solutions. The sterilization process was the most critical and challenging component. Collins developed a multi-stage protocol. First, a thorough scrubbing of the canteens with surgical soap, followed by a rinse with distilled water. The canteens were then filled with the carefully measured solution and sealed with rubber stoppers salvaged from empty medicine bottles. Finally, they were placed in the hospital's autoclave for sterilization. To create a safe delivery system, Collins modified standard IV tubing to connect to the canteen spouts, adding improvised filters made from layers of sterile gauze to catch any potential contaminants. Each completed unit was labeled with its contents and preparation time. By evening, Collins presented Dr. Harrison with the first batch of 12 improvised IV units. Lab technician Corporal James Murphy had inspected samples under a microscope and confirmed they were free of visible contaminants. Still, using them remained a significant risk. "We'll test the first unit on me," Collins volunteered. Dr. Harrison refused. "Too risky," he said, "and we need you functional." Instead, he made a difficult decision. They would use the improvised solution first on the most critical cases, men who would die without intervention. The first patient to receive Collins' improvised IV solution was Private Thomas Miller, a 19-year-old from Ohio suffering from severe shock after losing his right leg to artillery fire. His condition was deteriorating rapidly, his blood pressure dangerously low. As nurses held flashlights in the dimly lit tent, Dr. Harrison personally administered the first Canteen I4, while Collins monitored the patient's vital signs. The medical staff watched anxiously over the next hours. By morning, Miller's condition had stabilized. The improvised solution had performed its function without apparent adverse effects. Dr. Harrison authorized the use of the remaining units on other critical patients. Word spread quickly through the hospital about the Canteen miracle. Collins immediately began training a team of nurses and medics to produce larger quantities using her protocol. Within 48 hours, they had established a production line that could prepare 50 units daily, enough to meet their most critical needs until supplies could be replenished. As the Battle of the Bulge intensified around them, Collins's innovation would be put to the test on a scale no one had anticipated. While the battle raged in the frozen forests of the Ardennes, Lieutenant Collins and her team were fighting their own war against time and limited resources. The Canteen 4 hack had shown initial promise, but scaling up production while maintaining sterility presented enormous challenges. The fate of hundreds of wounded soldiers hung in the balance. Collins' background in chemistry proved invaluable during this critical phase. Before the war, she had worked for 3 years at Minneapolis Medical Laboratories, where she had been part of a team developing improved intravenous solutions. This experience gave her a deep understanding of not just the clinical application of these fluids, but their composition and manufacturing process. Medical science in the 1940s was undergoing rapid advancement, particularly in fluid therapy. The basics of intravenous rehydration had been established decades earlier, but the war had accelerated research into blood substitutes and improved electrolyte solutions. Collins had kept abreast of these developments through medical journals, even while serving at the front. The standard military AFU solution of 1944 was relatively simple: sterile water with precise concentrations of sodium chloride, salt, and sometimes glucose, sugar. These concentrations had to be exact. Too much or too little salt could be fatal to an already compromised patient. Commercial solutions were prepared under laboratory conditions with precise measurements and rigorous quality control. Luxuries not available in a besieged field hospital. Collins understood that the margin for error was exceedingly narrow. In her improvised laboratory, she developed a system of double-checking measurements, using the postal scale calibrated against known weights. For the salt concentration, she calculated that each liter of solution required 9 grams of sodium chloride to match normal saline, roughly the equivalent of 2 standard salt packets from K-rations, carefully measured. Photographs from the hospital archives show the makeshift production setup: a row of cleaned canteens arranged on a folding table, with handwritten labels indicating preparation dates and contents. Nearby, an autoclave, normally used to sterilize surgical instruments, had been repurposed to heat the filled canteens to 121 degrees Celsius, the temperature required to eliminate bacterial contamination. The improvised filtration system proved especially challenging. Without access to proper laboratory filters, Collins created a multi-stage system using materials on hand: surgical cotton, fine mesh gauze, and even coffee filters requisitioned from the officer's mess. Each component was pre-sterilized and assembled using surgical techniques to maintain sterility. The genius of Collins' system wasn't just the idea, noted Dr. Eleanor Reed, a medical historian who later studied the innovation. It was her attention to procedural detail that made it viable. She essentially created a field-expedient pharmaceutical production protocol that maintained surprisingly high standards under impossible conditions. As the first full day of production proceeded, Collins methodically documented each step and result, keeping meticulous records that would later prove invaluable to military medical planners. Her notebook, preserved in Army Medical Corps archives, shows detailed observations on each batch. Batch number 3, solution clear after filtration, no visible particulates, sterilized 37 minutes at pressure, 12 units produced, all sealed and labeled, no contamination observed in test sample. The hospital's lab technician, Corporal Murphy, was assigned to examine random samples from each batch under a microscope. "I've seen commercially produced solutions that weren't as clean," he reportedly told Dr. Harrison after the first day of full production. Whatever she's doing with those canteens, it's working. The second major challenge was adapting the canteens to function as IV reservoirs. Standard IV equipment was designed to connect to glass bottles with specific fittings. Collins worked with Sergeant Robert Denton, the hospital's equipment maintenance specialist, to modify the canteen caps to accept IV tubing. Using small pieces of metal tubing salvaged from damaged medical equipment, they created adapter ports that could form a tight seal with standard IV lines. The delivery system required careful consideration as well. Without the hanging poles used for conventional IV bottles, Collins devised brackets that could be attached to stretchers, beds, or even tree branches when necessary. For transport of the wounded, she designed a shoulder harness that allowed medics to carry the canteen of ease while moving patients. By December 21st, 3 days into the crisis, Collins' team of 7 nurses and 3 medics had produced over 120 units of improvised IV solution. Hospital records show that 43 patients had already received the treatment with no reported adverse reactions. Dr. Harrison's medical log noted, "Alternative fluid therapy protocol showing remarkable efficacy. Patients receiving canteen solution demonstrating hydration and stabilization comparable to standard treatment." As news of the innovation spread to other medical units caught in the German offensive, requests for information began to arrive. Collins prepared a 1-page instruction sheet titled "Emergency Saline Preparation Using Field Equipment," which was copied and dispatched to nearby units facing similar shortages. On December 22nd, the hospital received an unexpected visitor. Colonel Mason Richards from the Army Surgeon General's office had been inspecting medical units in the area when he heard about Collins' innovation. Initially skeptical, he spent several hours observing the production process and reviewing patient outcomes. "I came expecting to shut this down as dangerous improvisation," he reportedly told Dr. Harrison afterward. "I'm leaving to see how we can support it and possibly implement it elsewhere." Richards authorized the immediate transfer of additional medical personnel to assist with production and provided a supply of pharmaceutical-grade sodium chloride from his own unit's reserves to ensure precision in the solutions. The validation from higher medical authority boosted morale among the hospital staff, who had been working under the constant stress of both the tactical situation and the ethical questions surrounding the use of improvised medical treatments. Collins's careful documentation and transparent process had demonstrated that innovation need not come at the expense of medical standards. As Christmas approached, the hospital's situation grew more precarious. German forces had surrounded Bastogne completely, and American casualties continued to mount. The weather remained too poor for air resupply, and the Canteen 4 solution was now the only source of intravenous fluids for over 200 critically wounded men. Collins continued to refine the process, addressing new challenges as they arose. When the hospital's autoclave broke down due to constant use, she quickly developed an alternative sterilization method using pressure cookers from the mess kitchen, calibrated to maintain proper sterilization temperature and pressure. When rubber stoppers for the canteens grew scarce, she devised sealed caps using wax and strips of rubber from discarded medical gloves. On Christmas Eve, with temperatures dropping to near zero and fuel supplies critically low, the hospital staff faced yet another crisis. The solution preparation required clean water, and the hospital's water purification system had frozen. Collins organized a team to collect snow, which was then melted and boiled for use in the solutions. Another improvisation that kept production going when conventional thinking would have deemed it impossible. Throughout this period, Collins maintained her regular nursing duties in addition to overseeing the IV solution production. Colleagues recalled her working 20-hour days, snatching brief periods of sleep on a cot set up next to her production table. Despite the exhaustion and stress, her attention to detail never wavered. a fact that undoubtedly saved many lives. The medical breakthrough was about to face its greatest test, as the battle reached its most critical phase and hundreds more casualties poured into the beleaguered hospital. As Christmas Day 1944 dawned over the Ardennes, the 107th Evacuation Hospital found itself at the center of one of the most desperate situations of the Western Front. The German offensive had surrounded Bastogne completely, cutting off the 101st Airborne Division and all support units, including the hospital. Artillery fire landed regularly within half a mile of the medical facility, and German reconnaissance planes flew overhead daily. Inside the hospital compound, the situation was equally dire. Fuel was rationed to critical medical equipment and minimal heating of surgical areas. Medical personnel worked wearing coats and gloves, removing them only to perform delicate procedures. Wounded soldiers continued to arrive, some brought by jeep ambulances that navigated through German lines in darkness, others carried for miles through the snow by fellow soldiers. The one bright spot in this grim scenario was Lieutenant Collins' Canteen 4 production, which had now reached a stable output of 60 units per day. Hospital records from December 25th showed 237 patients had received the improvised solution, with survival rates comparable to those achieved with standard medical supplies in less desperate circumstances. The challenge now facing Collins and her team was one of scale. Their initial production protocols had been designed for dozens of units. Now they needed hundreds. Additionally, as the siege continued, even basic supplies like canteens became scarce. Innovation would need to extend beyond the medical process to the logistics of production. Captain Thomas Reynolds, the hospital's supply officer, worked closely with Collins to address these challenges. "We need to think beyond individual canteens," he suggested during a planning meeting on December 26. "What about the field kitchen's large coffee urns? They're essentially giant canteens, aluminum vessels designed to hold liquid at high temperatures." Agreed. This insight led to the next evolution of Collins' system, batch production. Rather than preparing individual canteen units, her team began using the larger vessels to prepare and sterilize several liters of solution at once, which could then be transferred to individual canteens for administration. This modification doubled their daily output while reducing the sterilization workload. To address the shortage of canteens themselves, Collins implemented a rapid turnaround system. As soon as a patient no longer needed intravenous fluids, their canteen was collected, thoroughly cleaned and sterilized, and returned to production. For identification and tracking purposes, each canteen was marked with a number using heat-resistant paint, allowing the medical staff to track how many times each container had been reused. The record-keeping system expanded as well. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, a former bookkeeper from Chicago, was assigned to manage what they now called the Canteen 4 Bank. She developed a ledger system tracking which solutions were administered to which patients, along with outcomes and any observed reactions. This data would later prove invaluable for medical analysis of the innovation. On December 27th, a significant breakthrough occurred when American fighter planes, taking advantage of a brief clearing in the weather, managed to drop some medical supplies into the besieged area. While the airdrop didn't include pre-made IV solutions, it did contain sterile tubing, proper filters, and pharmaceutical-grade glucose and saline. Collins immediately incorporated these supplies into her production system, further improving the quality and safety of the Canteen Vs. The improved supplies coincided with a new challenge. The German offensive had pushed several more medical units into the Bastogne pocket, bringing with them hundreds of additional wounded requiring care. Through coordination with the 101st Airborne's command, these casualties were distributed among all available medical facilities, with the 107th designated as the center for the most critical cases due to their now established IV production capability. Collins' operation expanded accordingly. With authorization from Colonel Richards, who remained in the besieged area, she began training nurses and medics from other units in her production protocols. By December 28th, 3 additional production stations had been established, raising the daily output to over 200 units. Sergeant James Davis, a combat medic who received this training, later recalled, "Lieutenant Collins was methodical in her instruction. She emphasized that this wasn't just a clever hack. It was serious medicine that required absolute precision and cleanliness. She made us practice the sterilization procedure 5 times before allowing us to produce actual solutions. She kept saying, 'The difference between medicine and poison is often just the dose.' The expansion of production introduced new quality control challenges. Collins addressed these by implementing a verification system where each batch was inspected independently by 2 different team members before distribution. She also established a color coding system using different colored threads tied to the canteen straps, red for normal saline, blue for glucose solution, and purple for combined formulations. The medical records from this period show remarkably few complications given the circumstances. In the entire operation, only 7 cases of fever, potentially attributable to the IV solutions, were documented, and no fatalities were linked to the treatment. This safety record rivaled that of standard medical practice in properly supplied hospitals, a testament to the rigorous protocols Collins had established. By December 30th, as the Allied counteroffensive began to gain ground around Bastogne, Collins' system faced yet another challenge: mobility. As fighting shifted, medical units needed to relocate to support advancing troops. Collins developed compact production kits that could be quickly packed and established in new locations, allowing the Canteen IV production to continue even as the hospital moved. These mobile kits, packed in ammunition crates lined with blankets, contained all the essential components for emergency IV production: a pressure cooker for sterilization, measuring instruments, filtration materials, and basic ingredients. Each kit could produce up to 20 units per day and could be operated by a team of 2 properly trained medical personnel. 5 such kits were assembled and distributed to forward medical stations. On January 3, 1945, as Allied forces finally broke through to relieve Bastogne, regular supply lines were re-established. Standard medical supplies, including commercial IV solutions, began to reach the hospital in significant quantities. Collins' Canteen IV production gradually scaled back as conventional supplies became available. In the final tally, hospital records documented 532 patients who had received the improvised intravenous therapy during the crisis, with 250 of them classified as cases where the treatment was deemed life-saving by the attending physicians. Cases where, without Collins' innovation, the patients would likely have died from shock, dehydration, or related complications. As regular operations resumed, Collins received orders to report to the 12th Field Hospital Group headquarters. Her innovation had caught the attention of the highest levels of the Army Medical Corps, and she was being called upon to formally document her methods for potential implementation across the European theater. Before leaving the 107th, she spent 2 days compiling a comprehensive guide to emergency IV production, complete with detailed drawings, precise measurements, and step-by-step instructions. This document, titled Field Expedient Production of Intravenous Solutions, the Canteen Method, would soon make its way to medical units throughout Europe and eventually to the Pacific Theater as well. Colonel Richards personally escorted Collins to headquarters, telling her during the journey, "What you've created isn't just a stopgap measure for Bastogne. It's a protocol that could save thousands of lives wherever our medical units face supply challenges." The Canteen IV hack was about to become official Army medical doctrine. On January 15, 1945, Lieutenant Margaret Collins stood before a panel of senior medical officers at the 12th Army Group Medical Conference in Luxembourg City. Just weeks after her improvised solution had saved hundreds of lives in Bastogne, she was now presenting her methodology to the Army's top medical planners for the European theatre. The room was filled with colonels and majors, career medical officers with decades of experience and formal training far exceeding that of a lieutenant nurse. Yet they listened with rapt attention as Collins methodically explained the Canteen method of emergency V production, supported by data, photographs, and the meticulous documentation she had maintained throughout the crisis. What Lieutenant Collins has demonstrated, concluded Brigadier General James Williams, the Army's chief consultant in medicine for the European theatre, is that medical innovation isn't just about new drugs or surgical techniques. Sometimes it's about adapting existing resources to meet critical needs under impossible conditions. The conference resulted in the immediate approval of Collins' protocol as an official emergency medical procedure. Within weeks, the emergency field production of intravenous solutions, Technical Manual TM 8227, was published and distributed to all medical units in the European theatre. While the official document used more formal language, medical personnel continued to refer to it simply as the Canteen method or Collins hack. Training programs were established at field medical schools throughout Europe, with Collins temporarily assigned to oversee the initial implementation. During January and February 1945, she personally trained over 200 nurses and medics in the technique, ensuring that her emphasis on sterility and precision was maintained in the official training. The impact of Collins' innovation extended far beyond the Ardennes. As Allied forces pushed into Germany, they encountered areas where infrastructure had been destroyed by bombing or retreating German forces. Medical units following the advance often operated in conditions of temporary supply shortages, during which the Canteen method provided a crucial backup capability. Major Robert Thompson, commanding a clearing station near Remagen in March 1945, reported, "When our supply convoy was delayed by bridge demolitions, we implemented the Collins protocol and maintained treatment of 37 critical patients for 30 hours until conventional supplies arrived. Without this capability, at least a dozen men would have died." Perhaps more significantly, the Canteen method proved invaluable in the Pacific Theatre, where long supply lines and island-hopping campaigns created frequent logistical challenges for medical units. Naval medical facilities on smaller vessels adapted the technique using distilled water from ship's systems, saving countless lives when casualties exceeded available supplies. On Okinawa, during one of the war's bloodiest battles, the 31st Field Hospital reported using the Canteen method to treat over 400 Marines and soldiers during a 3-week period when regular supply ships were delayed by typhoons and enemy action. Their after-action report specifically credited Collins' innovation with maintaining a 74% survival rate among critical casualties, substantially higher than would have been possible without intravenous therapy. As the war in Europe ended in May 1945, Collins received orders to return to the United States. Before her departure, she was awarded the Legion of Merit, an unusual honor for a lieutenant, in recognition of her life-saving innovation. The citation, signed by General Dwight D. Eisenhower himself, stated in part, "Lieutenant Collins' exceptional initiative and technical skill resulted in a medical innovation that saved hundreds of lives under the most challenging battlefield conditions. Her contributions represent the highest traditions of the Army Medical Corps." Upon returning to the United States, Collins was asked to contribute to the Army's revision of field medical protocols based on wartime experience. Her insights helped shape post-war emergency medical practices, particularly for operations in austere environments where conventional supply chains might be compromised. After her discharge from the Army in November 1945, Collins returned to Minneapolis, where she used her GI Bill benefits to earn a master's degree in pharmaceutical chemistry. She subsequently joined the research department at Minneapolis General Hospital, where she continued to work on improving intravenous therapies. The Canteen method itself evolved in the post-war period. While modern hospitals rarely face the extreme shortages encountered at Bastogne, the principles Collins had developed found new applications in disaster response and military contingency planning. The concept of field expedient medical production became a standard component of military medical training, with the Canteen method serving as the foundational case study. During the Korean War, MASH, Mobile Army Surgical Hospital, units incorporated modified versions of Collins' techniques when helicopter evacuations were delayed by weather or enemy action. In Vietnam, Special Forces medics operating in remote areas were trained in similar methods to maintain treatment capabilities when separated from conventional supply chains. Beyond military applications, Collins' innovation influenced civilian disaster response protocols. Following the 1964 Alaska earthquake, emergency responders used a modified Canteen method to produce intravenous fluids when medical facilities were damaged and supplies were limited. Similar adaptations were documented following Hurricane Camille in 1969 and the Nicaragua earthquake of 1972. In 1975, 30 years after the Battle of the Bulge, the Army Medical Department formally recognized Collins' contribution by establishing the Lieutenant Margaret Collins Award for Medical Innovation, presented annually to medical personnel who develop field expedient solutions to critical care challenges. At the award's inaugural ceremony, Collins, by then Dr. Margaret Collins Weber, a respected researcher in intravenous therapy, reflected on the legacy of her wartime innovation. What happened at Bastogne wasn't about one person having a clever idea. It was about what can be accomplished when dedicated medical professionals refuse to accept that nothing can be done. Sometimes the most important medical supply is determination. Redo, the Canteen 4 hack, remains a case study in medical schools and military training programs today, not just for its technical ingenuity, but for what it represents, the critical importance of adaptability and resourcefulness in emergency medicine. Modern combat medics and disaster response teams still train in principles derived from Collins' work, adapted for contemporary conditions and equipment. In the Army Medical Museum at Fort Sam Houston, a display features an original Canteen I-4 unit, preserved from Bastogne, alongside Collins' handwritten notes and the first printed copy of Technical Manual 8-227. The accompanying plaque summarizes a remarkable legacy. When conventional wisdom said nothing could be done, one nurse's innovation saved 250 lives and changed military medicine forever. Perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from those whose lives were directly impacted. In 1994, at the 50th anniversary commemoration of the Battle of the Bulge, Tom